to GMOs. What's a GMO and should you avoid them? Comedian Jimmy Kimmel Show once posed these questions at a farmer's market.
Do you try to avoid GMOs in your diet?
I do. There's just a vibration with GMOs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
You're avoiding processed food, but when the whole food is somehow contaminated, that's kind of making it a moot point.
What does GMO stand for?
Genetically modified. Genetically modified.
I don't even remember.
It's genetically I don't know, what is it?
Genetically manufactured. Oh.
I don't know, so I really don't care. It doesn't affect me. I'm not sick. I'm fine. So.
For those of you still awaiting the answer, GMO stands for genetically modified organisms, and it's what you get when a plant or animal is artificially implanted with genes from the DNA of another species of plant, animal, virus, bacteria, theoretically to improve the product. And yes, I did have to look that up. Joining me to discuss further are Anna Sortun, who you may recognize from Top Chef Masters, also the chef owner of the great Oleana Sarma and Sofer Bakery and Cafe. It's great to see you, Anna. Thanks so much for being here. Corby Kummer, a columnist for the New Republic, contributing senior editor at The Atlantic, food critic for Boston Magazine. Roger Berkowitz, head of Legal Seafoods, was slated to join us. Unfortunately, the snow delayed his flight. Good to see the two of you. Now, if Roger were here, what he would say is, as goes genetically altered salmon, I would not serve it in our restaurants as I'm personally not convinced of its impact on our bodies, either long-term or short-term. Where are you on GMOs in your places?
I feel the same. I think we know what we know, right? I think transparency is good, and if I know something has been genetically modified for a good reason, I think there's good places for it too, and there's bad places. But
like what?
Mostly the plant breeding, which isn't really the same type of genetically modified that people are associating GMOs with.
So it's on a case-by-case basis for you?
Well, the plant, there's a difference. There's the way it's done in nature, and then the way that it's done sort of by bringing something that's not natural, like a salmon gene into play when it's a plant, when it wouldn't normally happen.
So you're not with her, are you, Corby?
I'm not, except I'm with her on every other issue there is in food.
Why aren't you? Why are you so convinced that there's no problem here at all?
In this, well, I am with you in that we automatically are suspicious of implanting a salmon with a tomato gene or vice versa. So what seems like tampering, playing God, is crossing natural species that otherwise would never be crossed. But there's so little of that that's happening in genetic engineering now. It's mostly trying to reduce pesticide use and trying to introduce vitamin A into bananas and rice to avoid deficiencies.
But how am I supposed to, she's the expert, so she knows what's yes, what's no. Let me show you a poll from Consumer Reports. 72% thinks it's important to avoid GMOs. You know this better than I. Most of the EU, the European Union, has banned GMOs outright. So if you're not an expert, how does the consumer know who to believe and what to do? That Jimmy Kimmel thing, I think, is fairly representative of America, no?
I love the Jimmy Kimmel clip because it shows how many people think this is something I should be suspicious of, but I don't really know what it is. The reason that most people are suspicious
Monsanto. That's why most people are suspicious.
It's because of the way that Monsanto and other companies have marketed these, restricted them, prosecuted farmers who by mistake get blowback of material from Monsanto seeds into their fields innocently and unknowingly.
So if it turns out at your restaurants, let's talk about the acceptable genetically engineered product, that you'd serve, but the unacceptable you wouldn't. Do you tell the customer? Does the customer have a right to know in one of your three places?
I don't buy or purchase anything that's genetically modified that I know of. I mean, we usually...
Oh, at all?
I'm a chef that's definitely not an expert on genetically modified anything, but I really care a lot about the ingredients that I'm using, and I search high and low for the most natural ingredients.
Well, you and your husband have a farm, don't you? Sienna is you, yes?
Yeah. And I think for me, I think as a consumer, whether I'm purchasing for myself at home or for the restaurant, it's nice to be able to have the transparency and know. And I think even the more information on labels, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because then at least you can make a choice. But I think when you don't know, so there could be a product that I don't know has some type of genetically modified soy in it that I'm using, but most of our stuff is pretty clear. But the fact that we can't know if we want to know is a
So
problem.
you're pro-labeling. You're
I am.
pro-labeling, I hope, or are
I'm
you not?
completely pro-labeling.
Did you read the Boston Globe editorial saying it's going to scare people because since GMOs, and they buy into your notion that all of it's fine, and so since it's all fine, why should we tell people that something that is fine for them is not in their product? All it's going to do is cause them to say, I want to go in another direction.
My main reason for telling them exactly what's in their product is because they will realize how unavoidable it is. So if Anna had...
Well, that's not very comforting, is it?
Right.
It's perfectly comforting because nobody's died. Or, you know, the results aren't in. So when you read it, you'll look at the contents of your pantry and think, okay, I'll wait 5 years to see if I'm okay or not. But it's over 70% of the foods we buy in the supermarket contain genetically modified organisms. And putting it on the label to say this may contain genetically engineered food or material, which is the language that's being used, I think is going to show most people are not going to bother to buy around it. Whereas Anna can bother because she uses organic food as much as she can.
But if one of the smartest, most celebrated chefs and owners in America, that would be you.
In America.
And it's true. I mean, you are. I mean, I know you're humble, but it is true. If she isn't on board of there's no problem here at all, then how do you expect the public to accept this notion that it's all perfectly fine? She's the educated consumer, provider, whatever, no?
I'm not asking that everyone accept the notion that it's fine. What I think is there's no turning back science which is going to increase its use of genetic engineering, and there's no turning back the idea it's in our food supply and people should know it and deal with it.
Is there a place where transparency stops? You're not covered by the law. I was a big proponent of this calorie on menu thing. My radio talk show host hates it because when you go to a particularly good restaurant, Marjorie Egan would say, when I'm paying big money, I don't want to know that I'm eating 800 calories or whatever. It only applies to 20 or more restaurant chains in Massachusetts. Is transparency ever a bad thing when it comes to eating in a restaurant, Anna?
Well, I think, I mean, if you're out there sort of doing the right thing, I don't think there's anything wrong with transparency. If people want some information, they should be able to, I mean, food is a basic human right, so they should be able to get some information on their food. And I think we have not been transparent enough. And I think there are, you know, if we were to label all the pesticides that were actually in some of the foods and things like that, I mean, it can go, you know, labeling cannot stop at all. It can go all the way down to, you know, the exact pesticides that were used. But I think, you know, you can't know everything unless you're actually growing it or producing it or best friends with someone that is. Every single ingredient that you're going to eat.
Did you see the first episode of Portlandia when they left the restaurant and went to the chicken farm to see how they had raised the chickens before they decided to go back and order the thing? Same deal. So Roger, when he was here last time, I'll speak on Roger's behalf. We happened to start, we only have a minute left. I said, would you allow Donald Trump in any of your restaurants? And he said, absolutely not. Would you?
Oh my God.
Would you?
I don't know. I have no idea.
You started to say, I don't think so?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Would you have dinner with him?
Oh, God, I hope that never comes to that.
Anna, it's a pleasure to see you.
Thank
Thanks
you so much,
Three
Jim.
great restaurants.
Thank
So
you.
nice to see you. Corby, you as well.